Voila, here we are, choices around the yard and garden. So glad you're all here and thanks for hanging out inside. It is a nice evening, although it looks like we're gonna get some rain, which is excellent because as you know, we've been short on rain. So choices around the yard and garden. St. Andrews, the environmental stewardship team asked me to put a talk together about how we can have an ecological approach to our landscapes and really thinking like nature. Not only does it reduce maintenance, but it makes things that much more deeply beneficial and provides habitat, as we can see these cedar waxwings, which I love this because basically her partner's feeding her like a whole orange if this was a human. It's kind of funny to me. This is a really exciting talk because we're going to take a lot of different angles on what it really means to make some simple decisions that are simply a slight change or tweak in some habits that maybe you're already doing some of these. I know it'll fill in the gaps for a lot of people in terms of how you think about your personal landscape, whether it's 1/10 of an acre or 40. So who I am, here I am, Pete Wyden. Artisan Environments is my design business. And what I love to do is help people help themselves create habitat and edible landscapes. So that's at the residential scale. It's also at the farm scale. This is actually at Allemansrat Park up in Lindstrom, Minnesota. Beautiful spot if you haven't been there. We did a planting with Great River Greening. That was a really good time. So I've got a background in ecology and landscape architecture. And after studying ecosystems as an ecologist, looking at the botany around the Great Lakes and what was happening with the ecosystems, I wanted to start helping others create productive ecosystems that produce food, create habitat, and layer the benefits on the landscape in our area. And so that's when I got into landscape architecture. And so I practice here in the Twin Cities area in Stillwater. So as you know, our choices benefit so many more than just one organism or one individual. This is a huge system that we're part of here on planet Earth, and it is truly remarkable. This is, there are other places I'm sure in the universe where there is life. It's that big, but this is just such a gem of a planet. And so in looking at how we can create landscapes where we're not using chemicals, where we're reducing use of fertilizer, where we're using organic approaches and minimizing use of fossil fuels, producing more abundance in a smaller area and creating diversity while also having it be manageable. We're creating that more complete food chain, which really starts from the soil and water, from the ground up. So our choices are truly foundational in that if we're looking at the quality of our soil, the quality of our water, and that's where all of our wealth, all of our health truly comes from. Of course, we've got the air, we've got different elements, but there's nothing that I can think of that we don't use on a daily basis that doesn't come from having these quality resources that we rely on. And of course, we see varying degrees of that quality, but we're in a very fortunate situation here in the Midwest and in Minnesota, where we live in a water-rich region. And so it makes it that much more important for us to set an example for how we treat our natural resources. And of course, if you see a cute little kid gnawing on a corn cob and it hasn't been sprayed with anything, it's healthy, it's nutritionally dense, there's nothing better than that. So we are borrowing these gifts from our future generations. And I was writing that we should always think about future generations when making decisions, which is true, but I felt like this was a little more powerful way to put it, because this is really something where, let's see if I can move this. This is really something where we're looking at the fact that we don't know exactly what our decisions are going to do in the future, but we can look at some of these simple changes in terms of the energy and the resources that are going into and coming out of our landscapes and coming back to us, how this how we can start to close the loop in some ways in terms of keeping our fertility in the soil, keeping fertility in the landscape versus in the water, and look at living a life a little bit closer to nature. All right, now I'm getting, there we go. So anybody can make these choices to benefit many. And the thing is that any issue that I see in the landscape is often a result of a gap in the ecosystem dynamics. So that might be some aspect of the soil, it might be some aspect of the selection of, is that plant the right one for the place it's in? But the fact of the matter is that you don't have to have a huge, I just want to make sure I'm still recording, but I guess it's not paramount. You don't have to have a homestead like my friends Andy and Sunshine down in Winona to be able to really make a difference in your own yard. So this is something I want to check. Okay, there we go. I am recording. Just want to make sure you guys can check this out later, or your friends can. So, you know, we don't have to be living this off-grid lifestyle to be able to make some decisions that are going to benefit that food chain. So this is something that we're not going to see for a while, where people are hanging out in large groups together, unfortunately, but this was out at that Great River Greening planting where we got so much done in just a little bit of time. And small groups gardening together, getting family together, it's easier, it's more fun doing these things together as, you know, a family or unit. Right now, if you happen to have loved ones who you live with, who are interested in getting out in the yard, doing things together, these experiences have lasting effects, not only on our well-being, mental, physical, spiritual as adults, but for kids grow up connected with nature, they want to protect it as adults. And this doesn't have to be something where everybody, you know, eventually, if we can, as we are able to gather together more, but also even right now, I've been gardening with some friends at a safe distance, and it makes it that much more enjoyable to be out. This doesn't have to be something that we do completely in isolation in the long run, at least. It's something where we can build community, a land-based community, whether it's on a small area or it's doing some of this larger scale restoration work together. We don't have to do it alone. And that's one of the coolest things, is that throughout history, the way that we view the landscape, the way that we view gardens, is also a reflection of our own political and social views at the time. And so it's really something where it's beyond just planting a plant and creating habitat, for example. It really is something where we can start to transform the way that we look at the interactions with others in our community, and meeting people and having our hands busy, and that allows our minds some freedom, and it's that much easier to get to know people who we might not otherwise be talking to when we're out doing these types of things. It's something that I found really, really enjoyable, so I wanted to make a point there. So as our journey unfolds here from the ground up, you don't have to go about this in terms of thinking that you have to transform your whole yard or your whole life, the way you're doing things. There is this aspect of, you know, if you're listening to this talk right now, you have an interest in having a more ecological, eco-friendly, earth, you know, balanced approach to how you're living your life on this planet, and especially as it relates to how you're treating your landscape. And there are other goals that might be associated with that, growing some food, bringing in the birds, having lower maintenance overall, which is totally possible with an eco landscape like this. But the thing is that, you know, whatever we do in the world, whatever change we make, can happen right in our backyard and then ripple out and have that greater effect. We don't have to be, you know, out there doing something at a massive scale. If everyone's doing just a little bit in their own life, these things really, really add up. And we can see right now, I mean, these are huge changes, huge shifts culturally and globally that we're going through with the pandemic happening. But you know, we see the canals in Venice clearing up. We see cities that were covered with smog, the skies clearing. And, you know, ultimately that is a huge change, but it's simply because each person, granted, can't go out right now. But think if each of us was mowing our lawn one less time per month because we were letting it grow longer to be more drought tolerant, how much fossil fuel that might save, or if we're not using synthetic fertilizers and we're using a different approach and getting a soil test done and using organic fertilizer that's appropriate for our soil's condition, how much less algae and things we might have in our rivers and lakes. So these are little changes that we can make where, each person's yard, since we've got so many people living in one place in a lot of areas, how much change that can really make. So here we get into what this change starts to look like. And one thing I really wanted to point out is that, this is creating habitat in your yard, for example. It doesn't have to be an entire transformation like this one is, but there are some ways in which that this image exemplifies that we can also keep the neighbors happy and not be that crazy person on the block, or at least show that these places are being cared for. And what I really wanted to point out here is that while these different plants might not be readily identifiable to you or certain neighbors, the fact is that this particular image is actually all native plants planted in this prairie here. And it's providing a lot of habitat benefit, lots of blooms over the season, and places for insects and animals to overwinter, while also being a relatively low maintenance planting. But the thing is that it's not just a pile of weeds. It's not just a big swath of something that's not being cared for. And it can be as simple as mowing a path either through a planting or having a bench right at the sidewalk and the area is cleared around there with some stepping stones or something. These are called cues to care, and they go a really long way toward social acceptance of some of these different types of plantings. And especially I find in neighborhoods with a homeowners association, for example, just a little bit at a time, transforming, like putting a rain garden in and something here, something there, and then having them blend together over time and connect to be a larger part of your, say, front yard. It often, I'd say 90% of the time, other neighbors start to see it. They start to do it themselves. It catches on, and then we end up with something like this, where in your, kind of normal looking suburban neighborhood, we start to have some of this really high quality habitat. So you don't have to start with something like this. It can start a lot smaller, and we'll talk more about how to do that. But really where this does begin is in the soil. And if we were in person, I would ask you, why do you think that this soil is so dark when it's fertile? We see sandy soil, we see cracked clay. It's usually a lot lighter color. The reason why this fertile soil is so dark is because of the carbon within it. This is a radish seedling with, of course, an earthworm. And this is some nice healthy soil. You can see it's got clustered structure. That organic matter helps to build soil structure. It holds more water. It allows airspace because plant roots need oxygen. But the fact of the matter is that it's dark because it's containing carbon. And for example, that image that I just showed with the prairie, about a third of a prairie grass's roots, for example, will die each year and then regrow on another part of the plant. And so those dead roots become carbon in the soil, and our perennial landscapes especially are really, really great at sequestering carbon. So if we're working on building the organic matter and fertility of the soil, we're inherently putting more carbon in there that doesn't end up just floating around in the air. And of course, that's one of our greenhouse gases aside from methane. So a really important aspect of this, and this goes along with putting organic matter back into the soil, is increasing the soil fungi for perennial plants. And so this is something that a lot of us, we haven't been exposed to what exactly that means in terms of soil fungi and how to promote it or what it even does. But a lot of plants, especially perennials, have fungi associated with their roots that helps them get nutrients. The plant gives the fungi sugars that it produces in exchange for helping the plant get nutrients. And the fact is that a lot of our lawns, a lot of our annuals, a lot of our like corn and soy fields where we're growing annual crops, they're very deficient in fungi because soil disturbance and synthetic fertilizers, for example, different chemicals that are going on the landscape, and also soil compaction, lack of organic matter, reduces the amount of soil fungi and increases the amount of soil bacteria. And in perennial landscapes with perennial plants, fungi is actually the dominant in terms of the ratio. So a mature old growth conifer forest is about 1,000 to 1 fungi to bacteria, and an annual field with corn is much higher on the bacteria. It's like maybe in some cases 10 or 20 to 1 even. So this is something where this balance is really important, and it doesn't have to be that hard to do, because one thing that a lot of us do is we're raking the leaves in the fall off the lawn, of course, because we don't want to get the snow mold and other things that happen that can kind of wreck the lawn if we leave those leaves there, no pun intended. But you know, if we're, rather than raking them into bags, taking all that energy, our own energy to rake it in, put it in bags, put it on the curb, and put that instead into our garden beds, or create leaf mold for the soul of the soil. This is like a chicken soup for the teenage soul type of thing. I'm just a soil nerd. So the thing is that we don't have to, say, forego our, you know, a certain aesthetic to have a healthy landscape, to be sequestering carbon, to be helping soil fungi. We can do something like this, where you can even just put some pieces of fence together in your backyard and dump the leaves in there, and then over the winter they decompose into what's called leaf mold, which is just a really nice, light, fluffy compost. But the thing is that if we instead, you know, we can save energy and time and also money by doing this, and the nutrition that's in those leaves from our trees. The trees are pulling that nutrition out and dumping it back on the lawn. But having those leaves, if you put them in your garden bed, it'll protect the plants for the winter from the cold temperatures. It'll insulate the ground. And what it also does is it allows insect eggs and beetles and other larvae and stuff to overwinter and to reproduce successfully. And this is a really huge thing, because a lot of our insects lay eggs on those leaves, either before the leaves fall or after. And that's a really important habitat for beetles and other beneficial insects that help to create more pores in the soil, allow more water and air in, or are cycling other nutrients, are cycling detritus and organic matter into fertile, you know, fertile droppings and other components that add organic matter to the soil. Because a leaf doesn't just turn into soil automatically. We've got a lot of organisms that are working on that. So keeping your leaves in your yard, in your garden beds, or making this leaf mold silo, which I call them, can be a really great way to keep that nutrition in, keep that habitat on the property, and also save yourself some time, energy, and money potentially. So looking at, you know, adding organic matter to the soil is really important. It helps a lot with the resilience, especially related to drought. It helps with the fungi, who can help your perennial plants, especially your herbaceous perennials, your shrubs and trees, to thrive. But it's also important to understand some basic aspects of the soil test. And you may have gotten one of these before from University of Minnesota. That's where this soil test is from. And I always do this when I'm working with somebody to figure out what is going to work well for their property, and also is any amendment needed. And in this case, what I wanted to point out was that high phosphorus, you can see on the top left under pH there, that P going to 25, very high parts per million phosphorus. That's pretty common in our landscapes, especially in a lawn where it's been fertilized a lot over time. Phosphorus doesn't tend to leach out of soil, it stays there. And if we're even if we're adding, say, manure or something that, you know, is an organic form of fertilizer, which I'll talk about later, that's also very high in phosphorus. And it's something where there are some of these things that you don't have to be an expert on soil, but knowing that if you've got really high phosphorus, using something like blood meal instead of a full spectrum fertilizer is going to be important to maintain the balance in your soil. Because having high phosphorus can bind up other nutrients, and also looking at our soil pH and planting plants that can do well in that pH range. I'll talk a little more about plant selection as well, but ultimately, we're looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the nitrogen is something that's going to be taken up every year for sure. Potassium and phosphorus are both important for different aspects of plant life. Potassium is really important for flowering and fruiting, and these all play different roles. But looking at, do we actually need to add fertilizer? You can save money, you can save energy and resources, and also potentially prevent some extra nutrition from going into our waterways. So I always suggest going with organic fertilizers for a couple different reasons. One is because synthetic fertilizers such as ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, that are derived from often petroleum products, so it's supporting an industry that's not doing the most, not doing much for the benefit of the planet and related to climate change. Really looking at these organic fertilizers because they are recycling often byproducts of farming, of, for example, blood meal is from butchering process, and recycling that back into the soil. So the thing is that animals, when they're on the landscape, especially in the case of, say, blood or bone meal is actually a source of phosphorus. And blood meal is something that you'd use if you had high phosphorus because it's just got a lot of nitrogen in it for the most part. Animals going around the landscape on a farm are continually taking in minerals, and they build that into their bones, etc. And so to have that going back into our soil is really important, to have that going back into our food source, back into our gardens and yards. It's really helpful to have some of these organic products because they have a fuller spectrum of nutrients, of macronutrients, which are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and also what are called micronutrients, which are boron, magnesium, calcium, and all these different minerals that make up a suite of healthy soil. That's basically like a beautiful, tasty broth with a lot of different veggies and ingredients versus just salt and water, basically, is kind of the difference that I would attribute it to. And so when we're using synthetic fertilizers, those actually end up burning up the bacteria and the fungi in the soil, and it's basically like throwing gasoline on a fire versus giving it a nice oak log, which would be the organic fertilizer. And getting these fertilizers in bulk when possible can save you packaging. It can also save you money. For example, Cowsmo is a really great compost company based in Wisconsin, and it's sold in bulk in River Falls at Earthworks, in Minneapolis at Concrete and Landscape, and it's in big bags at a place called All Good Organics up in Hugo or Lino Lakes. I also really enjoy putting food scraps in my worm bin. I have a bunch of red worms in a Tupperware Rubbermaid bin that I have holes drilled into, and if you want more information about that, I'll have my email at the end of this talk, so if there are questions you have, you can ask them in the chat here or send me an email. And I can give you guys a talk summary via email if you're interested too. But I put together a worm bin, and so I put my kitchen scraps in there. It turns it into very, very nitrogen-rich compost, which I actually need to mix 3 parts regular soil to 1 part worm compost because it's so high in nitrogen, it'll burn my plants. And then chicken manure is a really great one for berries, fruit trees. It's very high in phosphorus, but again, you want to know what your soil is like before we're really talking about just throwing something on there. So looking at fertility, we don't always need to fertilize. And if we've got a veggie garden, such as the example on the right, we're looking at building up that fertility because we're putting in things that, we're taking out a lot of that organic matter. We're taking out water, we're taking out nutrition whenever we are harvesting and using those vegetables, and the compost doesn't come right back to the garden. And of course, I don't think any of us on this call are composting our own human waste, although that was something done in a lot of cultures up until not too long ago. But we don't have all our nutrition going back to a site. And so we're really looking at putting that back on each year for something like a vegetable garden. But when we look at the left, which is a tall grass prairie planting, some gray-headed coneflower, the yellow, the bee balm, that pink, which attracts hummingbirds, by the way, and then the big blue stem, that tall grass that actually bumblebees lay in the base, overwinter in the base of different bunch grasses in the prairie. So it's one reason why it's important to keep our herbaceous plants upright rather than cutting them down in the fall. It looks really nice in the winter to have them upright and also provide some habitat. But as far as a native planting, one of the reasons why I love using natives instead of all horticultural varieties such as hydrangea, spirea, etc., is because that we can have native plants that are selected for our specific site. The pH of the soil type, which I'll talk about, the light conditions, if it's dry shade or wet shade, we can really fine tune this and create a really cool landscape that has a lot of seasonal interest and a lot of environmental benefit, ecosystem services such as pollination value, creating habitat, holding soil, preventing erosion, things like that. Native plants are adapted to all different conditions because they had to. And so we have different species that'll work in different areas, whereas say in a vegetable garden, we're adding fertility because these plants can't thrive without it. And, there's a certain purpose to that. It's producing food, which is its own service in and of itself. But there's only a certain type of soil and a certain place in general that we're certain conditions that's going to work in. So we're getting into now matching plants with your site. And so what I wanted to do here was just simplify making some really ecological decisions in terms of choosing some native plants or some plants that will be lower maintenance. They won't take as much time and energy of yours, but they also don't take the fertilizer, any chemicals, etc., to have them thrive in your landscape, which it has benefits all across the board. And so the first thing that I'm looking at is the soil type. And so there's 4 different components of any soil. I'm sure a lot of you have some sandy soil being in our region. We see a lot of clay in our soil as well. Not quite as much silt. Silt is a finer mineral substance that's deposited by rivers. That's why we've got this big, beautiful braided river there. And then we've got loam, which is decomposed organic matter that might be like a sandy loam soil might be a woodland that has been on a sandy site for hundreds or thousands of years, would start to make a loamy sand soil. So your soil is going to be a mixture of any one of these. And that soil test, for example, from the University of Minnesota, will help you understand the texture of your soil. But the soil texture also influences how much water is available, how well your soil drains, etc. And it's all about the amount of pore space, the air space in your soil. So of course, sand drains really well. There's a lot of air space. Clay holds on to soil. And so in your yard or wherever you're going to do a planting, through observation, throughout a couple different seasons, where the ponding happens in the spring, what happens when it rains, where are the areas where erosion might happen, but especially where are those places where a certain plant that likes a little more water might enjoy that, and where a place that's really sunny and sun-baked and sandy, there are native plants, for example, and even some cultivated plants for sure. Some plants you just find at your traditional nursery can work as well, but this is where we start. So it's soil type and water availability, and then I'm looking at light conditions. So it's really 3 main things I'm considering. And if you go to your nursery just down the road or wherever you may be, you'll see that a lot of plants either say full sun. Most plants that are a flowering plant will say full sun, and that doesn't mean that they'll only work in full sun. I found that at a lot of nurseries in the Twin Cities area, I think probably in general, a lot of the plant tags are just very generic. So you can do a little more research. Doesn't necessarily mean that something can't grow at your property if you've got a little more shade, something like that. But there's really 3 types of shade. There's full shade, which is less than 4 hours per day of sun. There's part shade, which would be 4 to 6 hours of sun per day, kind of that middle of the road. And then full sun, which is anything more than 6 hours of sun per day, where things are really getting baked, they're really getting a good amount of sun, and that's where we get into a lot more flowering and fruiting plants if you're looking to produce food at your place. But these are the main things that I'm considering when I'm looking for a plant that's going to be a choice where it's going to take care of itself for the most part, rather than needing a lot of babying, which is where we get into having to use a lot of inputs or having to amend the soil pH to try and grow blueberries, for example. I live on a blueberry farm called Blueberry Fields of Stillwater, and it's an amazing place, but there's so much work that had to be done to have this be productive. So, planting some blueberries can be great, but at the same time, you could also just come over to the farm, for example, and pick your fill of blueberries, and then choose some things, like maybe there's some raspberries you're going to do really well if you have sandy soil that's a little bit higher pH, and you can avoid some of that headache and also reduce your resource use by choosing something that doesn't need so much amendment for your site. So another thing that isn't talked about very much about native plant selection is local genotype. And so what that means is that those plants have been grown from seed that was collected in our local region. And you can see how beautiful these colors are. I didn't enhance this photo at all. These oranges, reds, etc. These are beautiful plants, especially in the fall, and then through the winter, they retain a lot of their color. But these plants that are local genotype have evolved in our region, and so they're really well adapted to the conditions and the certain fluctuations in temperature, weather, and climate that have happened throughout history here. And granted, we do have widely varying temperatures and swings in climate these days, but this is something where we can really look at resilient genetics that are coming from our region. They're adapted to the soils, they're adapted to the climate, and then also there is some evidence that our native insects that have evolved with these specific populations of plants do best when they have those plants around them, versus taking something that was bred in Montana and bringing it to Minnesota. The insects will, they'll visit it, say like a Shasta daisy or something, but it might not be doing quite as much benefit in terms of the nutritional quality, etc., based on the soils and based on that association that our insect friends, pollinators and parasitic insects, there are actually a lot of insects other than bees and bumblebees, such as wasps and flies, that pollinate our flowers and will eat pollen, things like that. So I'll talk about some nurseries that have good sources for these types of local genotype plants too. And this is a really cool thing that I found wasn't so mysterious after I started looking at the soil type and the water availability and the light conditions. So this is bottle gentian, which is said to only work well in very rich soils, but I've seen it work in kind of sandy soils as well. It's interesting once you start looking at these different plants and where they're actually choosing to grow. It's not always what the books or the signs say, for example, but adding unusual natives, it doesn't have to, or unusual plants in general, it doesn't have to be such an obscure thing, because we're really looking at what are those conditions that these plants thrive in. And if we have conditions that match that, for example, I really love the Prairie Moon nursery website. Prairie Moon is in Winona. And my friend Sunshine, who has that homestead I showed a picture of, works there. And they have a really awesome website where you can look at the different plants or a different seed mix for a dry shade, sandy soil seed mix, and see what plants work there. You could either get that seed mix, or you could just get a couple different plants from a local nursery that you see on that mix, see if they work for your dry, shady, sandy area, for example. So this isn't rocket science, and I don't want to oversimplify it, but I also want to invite you to try out some things that you might not otherwise have, because not only is that going to create more interest for you, but it also is providing more habitat for other insects, other organisms that we might not even know about, we might not even see, but we're benefiting by bringing some of these unusual plants in. So this is a really exciting thing. This might not be your cup of tea in terms of the aesthetic of this garden. I personally love the kind of whimsical fairy feel, but I design gardens of all styles. And what I really wanted to point out here is that there's vertical and horizontal layering in this garden. And this is really important to not only take advantage of the resources at our fingertips, all of the sunlight coming our way, but also cover some of the resources that weeds are going to use to take advantage of open areas, such as if we have just a few shrubs planted with a lot of mulch, you know, we're probably going to be weeding a lot, versus if we use some ground covers, which I'll talk a little bit about some part shade and shade loving ground covers in a bit, but we've got lamb's ears in here. We've got some different herbaceous plants like oregano, different things that might be useful in a culinary way or just beautiful to look at, but that are creeping and mounding. Like wild geranium is another great one for our region, wild strawberry, where we're looking at some of these creeping plants that can fill in the gaps between some of these bigger ones, so we don't have so many gaps in between plants, but it also doesn't end up becoming just a giant thick area of just one height of plant, so it doesn't look like a whole mess. We've got this tiered effect vertically as well, from the front of a bed to the back, which in general lends itself to a really nice aesthetic, while also shutting out some weeds, getting more diversity in there, which can help in the habitat aspect of things, reduce maintenance, and also bring more enjoyment to the act of gardening while we're really working with nature. Because if you look at any area in nature, I'm looking out my window and every inch of that soil is covered, and if it's not, different pioneer species like a dandelion or a birch tree, things that have wind-blown seeds, or milkweed, which is a really fun native, they're going to come in and take advantage. And that can be good to do in certain situations, but might not be ideal for how you want to treat your landscape. It can also reduce the feeling of having to, say, spray something with a chemical, which I never recommend. So landscape diversity, and this is another aspect of, not only is it reducing weed pressure, but we're looking at forage quality and shelter for beneficial insects. So forage quality being the blooms and different kinds of flowers, different shapes. I'll talk about that in the next slide, and providing shelter for beneficial insects. So like I said, the bumblebees or other insects that lay their eggs on some of these prairie grasses, for example, and the larvae eat the blades of the grass. And that's how these insects perform their whole life cycle. But we're really looking at, oh, it looks like I might have taken out. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I had a slide on winter interest. I don't know if it'll let me, oh, it'll let me go back, okay. So we're really looking at having that spread of bloom time. So we have native plants here, such as pasque-flower, our violets, a bunch of other really cool plants that bloom even in April and then early May. And like our willows and our aspen trees, for example, are blooming, and they're providing forage for pollinators and other beneficial insects right now as we speak, early in the season when they really need that help to get going once they emerge. And then of course, it's really easy to find things that bloom like June through August, right? But we also have some great plants like asters and goldenrod. By the way, goldenrod is not the cause of like hay fever. It's our native ragweed. They just happen to bloom at the same time. There are a lot of great fall plants, fall blooming plants that can bloom even through October, that are really, really important as honeybees, which aren't native, but are important for pollination. Honeybees, bumblebees, you know, all of these different insects are using that forage to prepare for winter. And this has an extra benefit of not only providing that forage and shelter year round, but also being beautiful, you know, all season long as well. I also did want to point out this huge bee home here. You can see that structure there with all these different blocks of wood and bamboo shoots and things. This is a cool idea. And on the farm, the blueberry farm here, we do have some boxes for mason bees, but they're much smaller. And I just wanted to point out that while this looks really cool to have all this in one spot, it can actually be harmful for the pollinators themselves, because it's not natural to have all of that population in one area. And those blocks and things aren't being cleaned out as often as they need to be for proper hygiene. So like pests and disease and fungal issues and pathogens can become a real problem and hurt these populations of beneficial insects if we have all that conglomerated in one area. So it's better if you're going to do bee blocks or something like that to put them kind of spaced out around the landscape. And I'm going to go back because this is something where working in drifts, we have diversity in the landscape. Not all of these are native plants. That rusty red is a stilbe, for example, and that silver is Russian sage, although Russian sage is, as you may know, so highly preferred by pollinators when it's in bloom. But working in these drifts can make maintenance a little bit easier, and it can make the aesthetics really pop, and especially when things are in bloom or in the winter landscape like this. But we also have diversity here, and we're layering things, and you don't have to be an expert at this to try things out and work in some of these drifts, for example, and have all these added benefits while having perennials on the landscape that are providing that forage and shelter, and also building that soil carbon. So one thing I also wanted to point out about insectary plantings is that we have this insect here on the bottom right called the tachinid fly, and it's actually a group of flies. And this is a parasitic fly that actually, there are some species that parasitize the grubs of Japanese beetles. And so this is on a goldenrod plant, for example, this tachinid fly. And so planting our native wildflowers and these mixed perennial plantings can really help some insects that we might not have thought are actually helping us with some of these new and relatively hard to control insect outbreaks that we're experiencing as we have this global economy. And I'm sure we've shipped things over to Asia as well. It's nice to know that we can at least start to look at buffering the effects of some of these issues before they get out of hand. And we do that by completing the ecosystem. So a not so beneficial insect that I always like to talk about is the spotted-wing Drosophila, and it's a little fruit fly. It just looks like your everyday fruit fly basically, but the male has spots on its wings. And the difference between this fruit fly, which is from Asia as well, and the reason why we have a lot of stuff from Asia here is because a lot of North America, at least Eastern North America, has some similar climates to a lot of areas of Asia, so that's why that happens. But the spotted-wing Drosophila has a barbed ovipositor. And so that means that it can lay its eggs in unripe fruit. It doesn't have to be rotten for it to lay its eggs. You may be nodding or shaking your head saying, oh yeah, I know that. I know about this, because it'll lay its eggs in any soft-skinned fruit. We've got currants, blueberries, strawberries, you can see everything there. And we've got other fruits that aren't even here, for example, like tart cherries. But the thing is that one, that tachinid fly, I don't believe it's the tachinid fly, but they're like, for example, dragonflies will eat spotted-wing Drosophila. It's not enough to really control them, but it's part of that ecosystem dynamic where something's helping at least, right? We don't have this void, this vacuum of this niche that's being completely overrun by the Drosophila. It's got some native predators that we can start to, enhance habitat for. But a really important piece here is that this affects your harvest activities if you are growing fruit in the landscape. So this is not something that I suggest spraying chemicals for. Some people do spray neem, N-E-E-M, which is from an Indian tree. It's an organic, often organic approved pesticide. However, neem does very much so affect all types of insects. And so if you're spraying neem, you are affecting other insects. So it's something that is really, I really only would suggest for somebody like an organic farmer who's really, really depending on a certain crop. So there are other ways to kind of get around this pest. And I talk about it because it is a big deal. And the thing is that harvesting fruit regularly. So these are wild fruits. This is wild grape and wild plum. But the thing is that if we have fruit in our landscape, we we want to be good stewards of the earth, right? And we want to make use of God's creation and all the abundance and bounty that's brought to us. And to be able to do that with the realities of Spoited-ving Drosophila is to harvest regularly and harvest frequently. Even if the fruit is just a little bit underripe, it's better to just go ahead and harvest it. And if you're not going to consume that fruit within 2 days, one, keep it in the fridge. But if you're not going to consume it within 2 days, even in the fridge, freeze it or cook it, because the little larvae of the Spoited-ving Drosophila are going to be in that fruit. And you may have experienced this if you bought something at a farmer's market, for example. It'll turn to mush if it's just sitting for more than a day or so, because those larvae are eating the fruit. And it may seem gross to have that in there and still be eating it. It is flavorless. I've heard it does affect the flavor of tart cherries, Spoited-ving Drosophila larvae, but they are flavorless. And if you freeze it, you stop the larvae, you kill them, or if you cook it, you stop them. If you're eating fresh fruit, unfortunately, you're going to be eating Spoited-ving Drosophila larvae, no question about it, in our region. And in North America, across the board, it's pretty much everywhere. So something we can't avoid, but something that we can use some of these mechanical and temporal, so the way that we harvest and how much time, and then the temperature aspect, that freezing and heating, where we don't have to spray chemicals and affect not only the health of the landscape and ecosystem, but our own health, but instead we can use the time aspect and how we treat our food after it's harvested. So this is another piece where I really like to talk about considering what you want to focus on, because we can only do so much in our yards, right? And we want to make sure that we can get enjoyment out of it. And if we have a veggie garden, we actually get something out of it. If we have a rain garden we're putting in, that the plants are going to be successful, they're going to establish successfully, etc. So that doesn't mean that you can't do it all to some degree, but really starting small in terms of, okay, let's start with a 10 by 10, or a certain area of a vegetable garden, and then expand as we want to, as we see fit. Or I'll talk a little bit about reducing lawn maintenance as well. Starting with just like 1 or 2 projects per year that for a fact that you can accomplish. And granted, this year with the pandemic happening, we're not going to be traveling as much, etc. So there may be some larger projects that you might be able to do that you can maintain and make sure things are established, and keeping a handle on weeds, etc., so that you get that great experience of being able to enjoy the landscape. And then we're also not having to even consider using, say, like an herbicide, something like that, if we're really looking at taking things in a bite-sized approach and getting, say, a prairie planting established by hand, versus trying to use Roundup. And if you do have questions on chemical-free landscape management at any scale, please reach out to me via my email at the end of the talk, because it's something I'm really passionate about. It's something that is less expensive. It's of course much more healthy for the ecosystem and for us as humans, especially for our children who are even more susceptible. And it's not terribly complicated, but it's not mainstream necessarily. So it's not information that's always that accessible. So I'd love it if you'd like to talk more about that. So this is really exciting now. And we're looking at the lifestyle aspect and reducing the amount of time that you might have to spend maintaining your landscape, because, I understand that, well, if you have kids or if you have dogs, etc., there are reasons to have a lawn to enjoy or to run around in, and all of that. The cool thing about some of these lawn alternatives that I'll talk about is that it doesn't have to look like this. For example, this is low mow fescue, and this hasn't been mowed in probably a month or so. And you don't have to mow it that often. It has deeper roots than our usual turf grass. Its roots are 6 inches deep versus 2. It doesn't need fertilizer in general, and it's something where you don't have to mow it, but you can actually keep it to like a 2 to 3 inch lawn height if you wanted to. It's called low mow fescue. And there's a great company called Twin City Seed Company that sells this seed. So these are some options in terms of having that open space, or maybe you're not sure if maybe you've got grandkids coming down the line or something, or you don't want to plant a whole perennial garden for yourself, or because maybe you're planning to sell the house in a few years, or whatever it might be, reasoning why you'd want to just cover it with something like this, where you don't have to be mowing every week or multiple times a week. But it's still going to be open, and it's going to require less, if not any, supplemental irrigation. By the way, our Kentucky bluegrass, our traditional lawn that we have everywhere, is meant to go brown in the summer. It does not mean it's dead. It's simply dormant. And unfortunately, it doesn't look good. It doesn't wear very well for traffic, but it doesn't actually have to be watered. So that is a point I always like to make. But really, the seasonal activities, we've got spring and fall cleanup in the landscape. These things don't have to be so intense if we match plants to the site conditions, and also look at that layering horizontally and vertically in the landscape as well. So another exciting lawn alternative here is bee lawn, and you've probably heard this term thrown around. So we've got that white clover in here, that Dutch white clover. We've got self-heal or heal-all. I believe those are interchangeable names for that pinkish flower. That's also very commonly included. So this is something that the University of Minnesota is really championing right now, which I really appreciate. So we've got a few different plants in here. We've got yarrow and creeping thyme in our lawn here at the blueberry farm, which is really fun. And these different plants can, in the case of the clover, fix nitrogen and help fertilize the lawn. And actually, after World War II, they had these companies had all these chemicals they wanted to find consumer uses for, and they couldn't find an herbicide that didn't kill the clover, because clover was in all seed mixes for lawn at that time. So what they ended up doing was lobbying to take the clover seed out, and that's why we don't have that in our lawns. And a big reason why, I used to think personally that a lawn needed to be just grass, but in fact it's a lot healthier with this diversity, partially because of the nitrogen from the clover. It also provides that habitat, that forage for the bees, which is so important at various times of year. Right now, we've got bees and all kinds of other insects, ants and things all over the dandelions in the yard here, and they're just loving it. And it's helping us as blueberry farmers, and it would help you if you have fruit trees, etc., to have that forage in your yard, because, granted, dandelions aren't that desirable in general, but in our culture, but they are very useful. They're actually very healthy medicinal. I infuse vinegars with dandelion blossoms, and I make digestive bitters with them. I eat some of the greens a little bit in my salads, but also they're providing that pollinator habitat that can help us when it's time for our fruit trees or shrubs to be pollinated, for example. So moving on. So this is a really exciting program. You may have heard of this as well, Lawns to Legumes. And this is funded by, it's a partnership between Blue Thumb and Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, also called Bowser, which I love that name. I grew up playing Mario. So this is a really exciting program where it doesn't give you a whole ton of money, but you can get up to a cost share of $300 for improvements to your landscape that's creating bee lawns, for example. You can get some funding to create a rain garden, I believe, as well. And you don't have to actually pay an additional $300 to get the cost share. What I hear, and I haven't done it personally, but what I hear is that you can also put in your own sweat equity and get that cost share as well. So you can look at the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources, or just type in Lawns to Legumes program, and you can get to the website to check that out. And at the bottom right there is our rusty patch bumblebee. That was the first, I believe it was the first bumblebee to be put on the federally endangered list, but it is a native that we have here in the Twin Cities area. And we also have some areas in Washington County, if you happen to be here, that are host to the rusty patch bumblebee. So in terms of preparing some of these areas, these are, on the left, that may be a larger area than you may ever consider, but there's some organic methods that I have used with success to prepare areas for a new planting, for example. And on the left is called solarization. So what we did was we took up the sod and we, I think we might have raked up the soil a little bit to rough it up and expose some more weed seeds that might have been under the soil surface. And then we wet the soil down and we put this painter's plastic down. I also, I've gotten recycled greenhouse plastic from a friend before. I'm actually doing that at the farm right now. And you let this sit for a few months during the summer and it'll burn up all the weed seeds, all the weeds that have germinated, and give you at least a nice surface to plant into. You don't want to rototill or anything after you do this, because if you're rototilling every year, you're bringing up more weed seeds, unfortunately, because there's always going to be more weed seeds that are dormant in the soil. They last for a long time for different species. And also, you're breaking up that fungi. So the soil fungi have these mycorrhizae, which are these really intricate, complex, very extensive networks of thread-like structure in the soil that helps to hold the soil together. It helps to transmit nutrients and things through the soil and hold water. And we're breaking that up whenever we till. So I only recommend tilling when we're first starting a bed. And I'll talk a little more about what you can do instead of that. But on the right here, I was tilling this area that had a bunch of buckthorn in it. I tore out the buckthorn with a pickaxe. You know, this is work, right? And I tilled it up. I raked out some of the grass seeds or the grass roots, because when grass is tilled up, the fragments of the roots can form new grass plants. It's kind of crazy. And then I put in some oats and some other cover crops, which is a really, really helpful way to get, you know, to help smother out some potential weeds. So for example, in mid-August, you could plant, and even a little bit later, you can plant winter rye in your garden to hold the soil for the winter. Or if you just have an area that you're not going to plant this year, for example, it's getting warm now already, so buckwheat, there's these different cover crops, like oats are good for the spring, buckwheat is a great one for the summer. Buckwheat also has really great pollinator forage value. So if you're not using a certain area, it doesn't have to become weeds. You don't have to spray it with anything. That's going to be counterproductive ultimately, because it's not allowing the complete ecosystem to express itself, and it's killing one thing, which is going to let other stuff come in. That's just how nature works. So cover crops are a really great thing to build organic matter in your veggie garden soil, for example, or to start a new area, to be able to seed. And timing for seeding of, say, a native prairie planting is going to be in the fall or the spring, when we have a freeze-thaw cycle and we have warmer than freezing temperatures during the day and then below freezing at night. So we've got this heave and this heaving action, this pulsing action of the soil as it expands with the freezing every night. It's actually bringing that seed into closer contact with the soil. It's really, really effective. And so in our region, October and about, you know, March are going to be the ideal times to seed in anything, any kind of mix. So I know I'm covering a lot of ground. I'm just helping you to, hopefully helping you to understand some of the simple ways in which I work on the landscape to create some of these ecosystems or these plantings that don't require chemicals to establish. And another thing that I love is no-till production for our veggie gardens. And the way this is done is that if I'm starting a veggie garden, I'll probably tear up the sod. I'll probably rototill at first just to get things broken up. And then what I do is I layer organic matter. So I might layer some compost, like the cow's milk compost, down to put in some nutrition. And then I'll put layers of straw and leaves and other things that are organic matter that's just going to shut out weeds. And then I'll plant through that. And if I need to seed in an area, I'll put some garden mix or potting soil fresh over the soil. So I'm not seeding into a bed of weeds, for example. This is an amazing garden. A man named Martin Crawford and his family in the UK. And what he does is he just lays down an inch or two of finished compost before he plants anything. And you can see his beds are relatively weed free. And that's the only reason. That's the only thing he does. So if you don't make a ton of compost, it can be expensive. But just like I said, the straw mulch, for example, not hay, but organic straw, which is the stems of a grain like oats or rye, is going to be really, really great mulch material to shut out weeds, keep moisture in the soil, and also increase reflection in your vegetable garden so that like tomatoes and peppers and things, they get even more sunlight and you'll actually get better quality production. So a really great resource that I love if I'm looking for low maintenance, hardy, and disease resistant plants that are like fruit plants for our region is University of Minnesota Extension. So they have an amazing website. You can look up apples, blueberries, raspberries, etc. And they'll say all the varieties that do well in our area, how well they produce, what diseases they're resistant to. If you're looking for apples, look for fire blight and apple scab resistance especially. Our Honeycrisp apples are delicious, I know, but they're often very susceptible to fire blight, I've seen, and so they don't last that long often in the landscape, unfortunately. These are some of my personal favorite native plant nurseries in our region, and Landscape Alternatives, Outback Nursery are in Schaefer, which is by Scandia. That's Landscape Alternatives. Outback is in Hastings. Minnesota Native Landscapes and Prairie Restoration are kind of straight north of the Twin Cities to a degree. And they all, to a large degree, use those local genotypes. And to my knowledge, they also don't use what are called neonicotinoids, which are a class of compounds derived from the tobacco plant, hence the nicotinoid name, which are very, very harmful systemic insecticides for our beneficial insects. And so you want to ask at any nursery you go to, especially if you're planting plants for pollinators specifically, do you use neonicotinoids? And if they can't tell you yes or no, unfortunately, I would say don't get the plants, but you can call ahead and ask them that as well. But I know Minnesota Native Landscapes, Outback, and Prairie Restoration have pledged not to use these. Landscape Alternatives, I really like them. I just am not sure. But Pollinator Friendly Alliance, pollinatorfriendly.org/plants and gardening, dashes between those words, is a really great resource. My friend Lori here in Stillwater runs that organization, and they've done a lot of amazing work putting some resources together to show you which nurseries are going to be neonicotinoid and pesticide free, for example. Okay, so it's 8:04. I'm gonna just run through these last few slides really quickly. I tend to get really talking on these. So if you're replacing buckthorn, I really like these 5 plants for doing that. They grow quickly, they're large, and they can help shut out that ground floor sun. So they help shut out sun to keep the buckthorn a little more at bay. Especially black elderberry, that top center is a great one. Hazelnut on the bottom right, those are the 2 best in my opinion. We've also got highbush cranberry and serviceberry on the top left and right, and witch hazel are all really beautiful shrubs as well. The witch hazel is an early bloomer. Actually, our native, blooms I believe in November. So our shady woodland ground covers, that wild geranium going, I'm gonna go from the top left clockwise. So wild geranium, beautiful mounding ground cover for part shade to shade. I really, really like this plant. I've seen it growing in sun as well, and I've also seen the same for ostrich fern in the top middle, which is our edible fiddlehead. So you can actually harvest 1 or 2 of those stems of those fronds, and you boil them for a little bit. They're delicious. I don't even have to season them. It's kind of like a spinach, a crisp spinach. It's delicious. We've got our native Solomon seal, wild ginger, and wild strawberry are some great kind of clustering, mounding, spreading plants that are native that can help shut out weeds and provide some habitat at the same time. And that heart-shaped leaf, the bottom right, the wild ginger, it actually is pollinated by beetles, and its flowers are right along the ground. It's really cool. It's blooming right now. So important point is you don't have to do this all yourself. Even if you're just talking with a friend about, hey, do you think I should do this or that? Or you want to reach out to me via email, happy to chat. And it's really about prioritizing, in my opinion, what you really want to get done in any given season and to be able to enjoy your time doing it. This picture's from helping teaching a bunch of 4th graders and helping them plant a ton of wildflowers at Sunfish Lake Park at the Sally Manzara Nature Center. Really, really beautiful spot there. So you can email me here, pete@artisanenvironments.com, if you do have any questions. I also, if you would like the email summary, which I've got some more resources and just some summarizing some of these points that I made, if you would like to get that, Pete@artisanenvironments.com, just send me an email. I'd be happy to send it your way and answer any questions that you may have if you don't get them answered in our Q&A here. So that was a lot, but it was really fun. I really enjoy doing this stuff. So I hope you guys got a lot out of it. I'm going to stop screen share here, and I will open it up. If you guys do have a question, you can just unmute yourself on the bottom left of your screen. Also, if you click on your own video image, you can unmute yourself as well. So we do have one initial question from Andrea, and if you guys do have other questions, you could just type them in the chat. That may be easiest, or you can feel free to speak up once I've answered this first one. So Andrea says, I have chickens. Should I keep their wood chips / manure separate from my other compost, yard waste, or mix them together to break down together? So Andrea, that's a really great question, and the answer is it depends. So one thing is that the chicken manure is really great. It's really high in nitrogen and things that are going to feed the bacteria and other organisms that are going to be breaking down your compost. The main thing I would say is your consideration is that you want to make sure you have, on average across the board, a 50-50 mix of green matter to brown matter in your compost. And so the green matter would be like table scraps, lawn clippings, things that are going to get slimy and gross if you just have a giant pile of only that. And then your brown matter is things like wood chips, leaves, straw, etc., that has more airspace and has more cellulose. It's more rigid structurally, and it provides more of that longer term fuel for the compost organisms to break down. So as long as you make sure you have good airflow in your compost and you're not just piling a bunch of stuff on that's going to become a slimy mess, you have that kind of 50-50 in general balance, it's totally cool to put that all in together, in my opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Does anybody else have questions? So I'm going to call you JJ, unless you correct me. I have a native prairie area that's been growing for about 5 years, JJ says. I mow every year, but the thatch is building up and I would like to burn. Do you have any recommendations on how I could do this myself? So it's 20 feet by 150, that's sizable. So the thing is that in any given year, and this makes sense that you've got a lot of thatch building up, because it's about every 3 years that it's recommended to burn a prairie. But the thing is that you've got this time of year, but any time of year, and this is when we, let's see, I hear a lot of people suggesting to burn in the fall, but I could get into details around that, because depending on when you burn, you might be benefiting certain types of plants like grasses versus forbs. But in terms of burning this yourself, we could talk a little bit more about that more in depth, because I'm not sure what your situation is and how close things are around the planting. But in general, you only want to burn 1/3 of any prairie planting in any given year, and burn go through the whole cycle every 3 years. But in burning only 1/3, you're saving the rest of that habitat, because there may be bumblebees or other insects that are in there, or other birds that are nesting, for example, depending on the time of year, that you want to make sure that those some of that population is able to still have its habitat intact. But of course, the burning is really helpful to stimulate the roots and stems of plants to grow. It can stimulate some plants to germinate. In terms of how you can do this yourself, I would say, this is just off the cuff. So I say this take this with a grain of salt, but mowing a strip of probably five or more feet, preferably like 10 feet, between where you're burning and where you're just going to leave intact for that habitat this year, and making sure, you have to make sure that, of course, the humidity is right, so it's dry enough to burn. You have enough, it sounds like you'd have enough brown matter as long as it's dry to burn, but you want to make sure that wind speed and the wind direction are such that you can keep that under control. I would recommend having at least 3 people for a third of that area, you know, with water, with rakes, to be able to keep that under control, and just doing a third of it this year, and having that mowed area as a fire break so that you can keep that under control. That's my quick-ish answer for that. So if you guys don't have any questions, we can wrap it up. I'm obviously happy to answer some more. After going through all that stuff, I don't have any particular things that are coming to mind in terms of, you know, something else to riff on. So, okay. So Mark says, great presentation. Thank you very much, Mark. I have a lot of wild blackberries that are taking over on my 6 acres. I was thinking maybe I should use black plastic to kill them. What do you think? So I haven't personally tried black plastic with blackberries. The main thing with plastic, black plastic in particular, is that if you did use that, you would need a thick enough plastic that's not going to get a bunch of holes in it. Once you put, say, rocks down on the outside to weigh it down, or whatever is weighing it down, and the wind action, you could end up with a lot of holes in that, for example. And also the blackberries themselves, you know, I've seen that solarization with the plastic work really well for herbaceous plants, where especially cool season grasses where their roots aren't that deep. For the blackberries, if you kept it covered for a long time, you know, definitely an entire growing season, and then maybe taking the plastic off a small area, or seeing if they're, you know, trying a small area at first, maybe, let's see, taking over on your 6 acres, like trying a, you know, a 50 by 50 square foot area and seeing how that works could be helpful. The best thing that I've seen to get rid of blackberries is to bring in goats or sheep. And this can be expensive if you don't have them yourself, but bringing in goats and sheep 3 different times. So bringing them back 2 times after they come the first, and as things are regrowing, to weaken those plants, and then planting some other, for example, such as like a shortgrass prairie or something that you can keep mowing. You know, taking a brush hog or brush mower through there could also be effective, but it kind of depends on your equipment and also the state of the land, if it's even makes sense to get in there. There's no one way to approach that, but I would say if you are going to try the plastic, just, you know, try a smaller area and, you know, get maybe a couple layers of plastic, or try to find somebody who has some leftover greenhouse plastic, for example, although that black is of course going to shut out the light, which is probably ideal. So in the world of landscape management and gardening, you know, hands down, having that natural herbivore action on the landscape is going to be what's going to weaken the plant the most. But of course, that's not as accessible often. Yeah, you're welcome, Mark. Elizabeth says, awesome, I'm so glad you guys are asking questions. I added plants to my gardens in the past before I knew to look for neonicotinoids. Once those plants die, their progeny the next years are not dangerous to insects, right? So it depends on the plant, and I'm not a really like deep science expert on, you know, what the research is here, but I do know that if that individual plant is coming up from the same root every year, you're likely going to still have those systemic insecticides in there because it's within the cells of the plant. In terms of the lifespan of those chemicals in the plant, I believe it's at least a few years. My friend Lori, the Pollinator Friendly Alliance, they actually have some resources on their website that I'm sure that may actually answer this. So the thing is yeah, if it's coming from the same root every year, it's probably still in there. You know, if it's been over 5 years, I'm not sure if it would actually still be present or not. So it's kind of an up in the air question. Of course, the best thing is to get something that hasn't been exposed to that. Yeah, it's, you know, it's funny. Some of these, there's not a definitive answer for some of these things that I have, at least. You know, my thought is that it wouldn't be as as potent after a couple years, but it would definitely still be in the plant if it's coming from the same organism, the above ground part sprouting every year. So Mary says, reed canary grass removal strategies. Yeah, that's a huge one. And, you know, it depends on what kind of location you have. Like if it's in a wetland, or, you know, if you're on the shore of a lake, or if it's just in general in a flatter, more accessible area. And the thing is that like mowing, for example, isn't going to take care of it. It's on a wetland border. So it's a pretty tricky grass to get rid of. A lot of conservation groups themselves will use Roundup to get rid of it. My thought for a wetland border like that, and you know, there are some companies such as Prairie Restorations and Minnesota Native Landscapes who would be the real, you know, go-to on something like this, because they're out there doing this exact stuff every day. I cover the gamut from I do farming plans for elderberry growers to edible backyards to pollinator landscapes, etc. So I know a lot about a lot of different things, but in terms of a specialist, those companies, Minnesota Native Landscapes, Prairie Restorations, would be the person who knows the most. And the thing is that you're either going to want to smother those grasses and shut them out. And so like the black plastic thing, you know, some impermeable cover is really going to be the way to shut that out. And granted, you know, it might be a very large area, but, you know, just mowing it repeatedly, for example, it's not going to do it. And herbicides, of course, not an option, especially when you're next to the water. But I personally don't recommend using herbicides because there are other solutions. It's simply about, you know, some of these questions, I may have an answer for it off the top of my head. Other questions, I may be doing some research to really look at the best thing, or talk to some other specialists as well. So you know, long ramble short, covering that with an impermeable, a light impermeable and a grass impermeable layer, for example, of plastic. Also, you know, there are some thoughts that planting through a thick layer of, like, you know, putting down a sheet mulch of cardboard and wood chips, or straw blanket and things, and planting through that. The thing is that reed canary is too tenacious to really do that. So JJ says, are there times when you selectively use herbicides? What do you use? When do you recommend? What do I recommend for herbicide? So Roundup has gotten a bad name, and rightly so, because it actually is persistent in our soil and water. It does not become, it does not neutralize on contact with soil, which is unfortunately very, very effective. I'm at a loss for what the word is. Well, it was just a very effective campaign by the company that we all now believe that, you know, it's neutralized when it touches soil, but that's not true. We've got Roundup present in all of our waterways, and unfortunately all of our bodies, including in children. It's everywhere. And if you, for example, unfortunately, if you eat non-organic wheat or oats, those are actually knocked down later in the season with Roundup to get them to dry out faster. So it's pretty crazy in our country, some of the stuff that's used. And I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but it's what happens. So personally, I don't use herbicides, but you know, sometimes if people are treating buckthorn and you just got so much of it that you can't pull it out physically because it's just way too much work, or it's going to disturb too much soil and create too many weeds on too large an area, sometimes, you know, people may use Roundup or another product called Garlon, which is, you know, it's a similar herbicide where you're just painting a little bit on that cut surface. You're not spraying it or broadcasting it. You're just you might have it in a spray bottle and just soak a little bit on the very cut edge of that buckthorn, or, you know, whatever plant that you're trying to get rid of. The fact of the matter is, though, that you know, that chemical is persistent and it will be there. So you want to be really considerate of, am I near water, which in a lot of cases we are, or am I near where children are going to be playing, or where I'm growing food, for example. So Cynthia says, how would you get rid, I hope that helped, JJ. How would you get rid of a dense stand of cockleburs in a wetland? Cynthia, I'm wondering if you're talking about burdock. I'm just not sure what the cocklebur is. I don't have that common name in my personal vocabulary. In terms of burdock, I would personally go in maybe with a scythe or a weed whacker if it is burdock, which is herbaceous, and keep knocking it down, knocking it down, knocking it down, because one of the things that is an issue with generally are weeds such as buckthorn, burdock, yeah, buckthorn, burdock, thistle, is that when we let it go to seed, of course, we get that many more of them. So that's the thing you want to avoid doing. If you don't have time to go into your prairie planting and pull all the thistles, knock off all the heads, for example, or the burdock, knock off the heads and like cut them off. But especially, I think it's probably true with burdock too, but especially with thistle, those seeds will actually ripen once it's even cut off the plant, even if the plant just started to bloom often. So you want to make sure you put them into, say, a big paper bag and then, have a bonfire and burn it up so it's not going to spread. Burdock is also a biennial in that the first year of its life, it's going to have a basal rosette of leaves and doesn't have that stalk. The second year is when it shoots up that stalk and has those burrs that are going to spread the seeds. So in that second year when the stalk is out, it's a lot easier, especially if it's just rained, to grab that stalk and possibly even get the root. And also, by the way, if you're into it, burdock root is excellent pickled or in soup. I really, really enjoy it. It's actually a choice vegetable in Asian cultures. So, but yeah, you want to get rid of that flowering stalk for sure, and make sure that it's not going to just sit around and form seeds and spread. Oh, Andrew says, do you have a recipe? We eat weird things too. Andrea, if you want to send me an email at pete@artisanenvironments.com. I'm going to type in my email here because I know that's a mouthful. I had this dream when I was in college to have a business called Artisan Environments, and I'm very happy with the name, but it's long. So the recipe is pretty simple. It's using a basic brine. It's like what's a half cup of salt per gallon of water, and then you can put in like whatever spices and things like the coriander, garlic, etc. The Asian versions, I'm sure, tend to have some more spicy stuff like chili and things in there. All right, guys. Well, this is a really, really cool variety of questions here. I hope I was helpful. I did put my email in there, so if I didn't answer your question or if I gave a very aloof seeming answer, we can talk more. But that's part of the nature of landscape management and consulting, is that we know a lot about a lot of different things, and then we know what we need to research as well. Okay, yeah, you're welcome, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for hanging out, guys. Definitely shoot me an email if you want the summary of resources. And yeah, I'll be around in the Stillwater area. So I hope to see you guys around at some point once we're all back at it. And I hope that you and your loved ones have beautiful spring. If you're a mother, happy upcoming Mother's Day. You guys are all very, very welcome. And I'm gonna go take a walk around the farm here and say hi to the horses and call it a night. So much appreciated. Oh, will I be sending the YouTube connection? Yeah, so I did record this, as you can probably tell, and I will be putting it on YouTube. Thanks for asking, Cynthia. And so I will email Cynthia the YouTube recording, and then if you guys want to put it on the website or whatever, that would be great. And Mark, I appreciate it. I try to be knowledgeable. I like to read and I like to look at plants. And honestly, that's the biggest reason why I might know that you need to make sure you put the thistle in a bag and get rid of it, or burn it, because I've done it before where I just let it sit and it became a problem. So yeah, we start to learn, and we can hopefully build up that generational knowledge again. Okay, and now I'm gonna figure out, okay, I'm gonna end the meeting here. So have a beautiful night, guys. I'll talk to you later. Thanks for hanging out. Bye.